If we can't have real conversations about pain, we're closing the door to spiritual practice for a lot of people, because a lot of people might feel that their pain isn't understood.
You're listening to Find the Good News, Episode 112, The Fist Switch, a Beacon Series conversation featuring Paula Lazarz, Shaolin martial artist, Soto Zen Buddhist priest, and head instructor at Healthkick Kung Fu in Chicago, Illinois. Find the Good News is produced by Parker Brand Creative Services, a branding agency that thinks sideways, pushes forward, and gets your brand up. See what else we do at parkerbrandup.com. For most of my adult life, I've been looking for fixed truths, constants that can be identified over and again, no matter the unique circumstances and shifting forces in play. What I've found on this search is that the only fixed constant is that there really is no solid truth. Reality is made up of bumps, cracks, twists, and bends, and when all those nuanced layers come together, we feel we found a truth or a way. If we sit with that perception long enough, we might be blessed to see that fixed thing dissolve or change before our very eyes. I share this perspective because it feels very much linked to the conversation I had with Shaolin martial artist and Soto Zen Buddhist priest, Paula Lazarz. Paula Lazarz is the lead instructor of Healthkick Kung Fu in Chicago, Illinois, a school that has been teaching the traditional arts of the Shaolin Temple to children and adults for over 2 decades. As someone that claims to practice Buddhism to some degree, I have been fascinated by the juxtaposition of the physicality of Shaolin Kung Fu with the seemingly docile meditation practices encouraged by most schools of Buddhism. In our conversation, Paula provides useful, grounded insight into how these two dance together. The truth is, she helped me better understand the relationship between the two and make peace with my personal struggles of using firmness or force situationally. I left this conversation with a better grasp on how to wield the elements of passivity within me, realizing that those gentle features are not always the right tools for a given moment. She reminded me that circumstances are always shifting, and that it is very important to have eyes to see the changes and diverse practices at the ready for whatever may arise. Now, I invite you to listen to a Shaolin teacher with a true gift for bringing insightful and powerful practices down to earth. Then tune your attention to this good news beacon and press play on a little good news.
Wake up this morning, you're dreaming up a story. I can hear the way it's going, 'cause you're laughing in your sleep. On the path to your deliverance in a holy wall of light, pouring through your window.
Old news, bad news, fake news. Sometimes you want to shut those signals down and seek a better source. With my Find the Good News Beacon series, I tune into good people doing good works wherever I can find them. I scan across the full spectrum of life, seeking out human beings that have turned their dials towards helping others, aligning their time, resources, and talents with goodness, justice, mercy, and love. In each episode, I sync up with the hearts and minds of my extraordinary guests. We have dynamic conversations that invigorate the mind long after our transmission has ended. I discover the critical life experiences that shape them, the perspectives that drive them, and the fundamental beliefs that have anchored them to a path of goodness. There's a lot of background noise in the world. My name is Oran Parker, and I'm cutting through the static to find the good.
And I love you just as well.
You know, I've went hot and cold with meditation. You know, it's depending on what's going on in my life. I would love to say that it's a daily practice, but reality is there are days when I go, I would meditate in the morning, but then the morning would have something come up and I go, well, I can't do it in the morning. So it was real inconsistent. But recently I've been able to bring some of that consistency back, and I use a meditation bench. It's like a little bench that you kneel and it sits under your bottom. That's the most comfortable for me. But doing that consistently, I told my wife, I didn't even put it together. I was like, man, my lower back and tailbone are so sore, but I couldn't figure out what I was doing because I'm thinking I've done some kind of strenuous, physical activity, but it was just from bringing that practice back in, and my body was, I guess, responding to that new consistent position.
What I've discovered is the sitting meditation is the yin side of physicality. So it's just as demanding, like Shaolin Kung Fu physically is very demanding in kind of a yang way, an energetic way, in the sense that you're moving. There's a lot of activity. And we're used to that with exercise. Like if you go to the gym and you're lifting, you're doing cardio and all that, you expect to be sore.
Yeah.
For some reason, when we think of sitting meditation, we feel somehow we can let go of the body. But actually, the body is very much present in the practice. And the fact that we're not moving and the body's demanding to hold a posture is actually very physically strenuous.
It's
used to it.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, we're so active. I mean, I'm pretty active. I mean, my day job, obviously I'm sitting in a chair with technical equipment, so I'm kind of tied to this spot. And I would think, okay, well, I'm sitting in this chair. Why wouldn't that affect me the same way as, sitting in meditation? But I'm really in this chair. I'm rather active. I'm moving around. I'm getting up. I'm getting down. I'm, interacting with a lot of things. But you're right. In meditation, it's just stillness. I mean, difficult sometimes to be still because we're so used to, the awareness of all the fidgeting that I do, that I don't even realize I do, the messing around with something on my body or ticks and little clicking your fingernails, just little things that in meditation all really get called out to me. Like, oh gosh, this thing that seems so small and insignificant is a mountain in front of me,
One of my teachers told me that when we're sitting in meditation and we want to move, but obviously we're sitting, so we're trying not to move. He said the only difference is when we go through our lives, normally, the minute we get uncomfortable, we do move. We're just not realizing that we're doing that.
Interesting. Yeah, so we're making a shift. We just don't realize we've adjusted. Well, that's interesting. I think about that a lot, even like with trauma, about adjustments, and I think about how someone who maybe has a knee injury or something, they walk with a limp to compensate for the injury, and then they don't realize, like the healing occurs and maybe the knee injury is even better, but then the limp is sort of still there. It's like the body, they didn't realize that adjustment was permanent.
Right. Unless you do like physical therapy or something.
Right, exactly. So we just jumped right in. I love how this happens. You get like the train just starts going, man. These conversations are so dynamic.
Yep.
So I've been really looking forward to this because this is a completely unique subject to anything else I've talked about on this podcast. I've never had anybody in your category really on the show. I mean, I've talked to spiritual people in different religions. I've talked to, people who serve the community in different capacities. I've talked, really just this broad spectrum, educators, you name it. And so this, to me, I was like, okay, I have so many questions because I guess the intersection for me, I'm heavily interested in Buddhism. I mean, I would consider myself a practitioner. But when you start to intersect with Shaolin and Kung Fu, I'm not going to lie, like my knowledge begins to really track off because I go, okay, I've been exposed to this through media, and I've seen it brought up inside of works that I've read, but never like in a focused way. I've always been like, that's very curious or very interesting, but I really don't know a lot about like how that came to be, how it formed, like, and then I followed you and just see the information you put out there. And something that really framed this up, and maybe we can talk about it. You had posted something the other day and I just loved it so much because it was actually a little bit of a break for me. You posted, how was it worded? Be kind, but take no shit. Or something like that. And I was like, that is kind of something that is, I like that spot, I guess, because I tend to lean towards this idea that we have to be sort of passive and fluid in a way that sometimes it sometimes can hurt us if we don't temper it with some kind of protective rigidity. And I don't know what that even means, what I just said.
No, I understand what you're saying.
You know, and I'm like, how do you protect the beautiful things that are soft and good and wholesome and healthy without some kind of firmness like rock or hardness too? And I guess there's some kind of balance there. But anyway, when I read that, when you posted it, I mean, I kind of chuckled, but I realized there was something deeper to that I maybe really needed to explore within myself, because I'm almost afraid of the harder parts. So it was interesting. I'm jumping way off the cliff right out the gate here. So
that's fine. It's fine. There's so much there, right?
Yeah.
There's so much there. I think for people who come to martial arts training, they're grappling with that very question. They're often very sensitive people, possibly very emotional people, idealistic people. And when you take that heart into the world, obviously you get stomped on a lot.
Yeah, right. You just described me.
So then it becomes kind of a koan or a conundrum or a puzzle. How do you maintain that heart and that love and that compassion and really be in the world with the way the world is, with the politics, with the social unrest, with the environmental problems we're trying to solve, with all the different personalities and all the ways that different people think? How do you sit in the middle of all that and still have your open heart and not get hurt, not get destroyed? Because we know if you go too far one way, if you're too open, I mean, literally, you could be destroyed.
Yeah.
Psychologically, emotionally, or, God help us, physically.
Yeah.
Okay? So we have to find the balance where we don't have to give up one and we still could hold on to the other. Martial arts tend to help us with that because we're really learning just simplistically how to defend ourselves against an attack. But really, when you have that mindset, like I really need to defend myself, you might not realize it, but you're not only thinking about the physical self, you're actually thinking about all the other stuff, even though it might not be at the forefront yet. You're just thinking, I don't want to be physically attacked.
Right. I see what you're saying.
It's going to come because you can't learn one without learning about the others. But we don't realize that when we first engage.
Yes, all of that makes every bit of sense. And what you just said there about what you're actually defending is something that is very interesting to me. I mean, I really would like to, maybe I need to sit with that, because that gets into that territory. Like, what am I defending? Like, am I afraid of pain? Not necessarily. Am I afraid of wounds and being cut or harmed in that way? Maybe no. But it's something else I'm trying to defend. It's not so much about being hurt or feeling pain. It's more about the idea of what's inside of me that I'm trying to, I guess, protect, and why. Because I want to give that to other people. It hasn't got anything to do with me, because I have children or I have a community or I have loved ones. I want to give them that part of me, and I can't do that if it's taken or jeopardized. And so it's a different, I never really thought about it that way before, like actually vocalize that. Am I getting into that in the space absolutely. The right way?
But we also have to realize that there's so many different people in the world that some people will engage because they're not comfortable with physical pain. Some people will engage because they're comfortable with physical pain, but they're not comfortable with emotional pain. I was more like that myself, because I'm a very physical person, and I used to joke. I'm like, punch me in the face anytime, man, but don't break my heart.
Yeah, I hear you.
I can take someone punching me in the face, but I can't take the broken heart. And other people will feel differently. They'll be like, man, I'll take a broken heart any day. Just don't punch me in the face, man. I physical pain.
So interesting. I'm going to tell this to you without really, I guess, tell it in a safe way, but I had an altercation many years ago with a next door neighbor, like someone on my street.
Sure.
And we had a good relationship, or at least a amicable relationship. There was no indication that there was any problem. And then out of nowhere, these sort of verbal attacks just started coming at me, like really hot and heavy. My nature was to say, okay, I don't like this, but this can't just be about me. There's got to be a source, right? So in my mind, I had this idea that, well, you know what? All we have to do is go present your heart to someone. Say, hey, look, I see this is going on. Maybe if we talk, then we can get into that space and heal this thing. That was my high idea. But when I actually did take the action, it really very quickly devolved into aggression, like borderline. It was about to head into a really bad place. And it never ended well. But I remember when I went home and told my wife about what had happened, what had transpired, I wept. I mean, I really did. I wept in front of her, and I was like, it broke my heart. And that was the true feeling. Like, I saw around that time period, actually, somebody said, don't appeal to a man's better nature, because you might have discovered they don't have one. And I was like, yeesh. At the time period when that had happened, I thought that's actually, unfortunately, kind of what I experienced. But it did make me realize, after my heart got broke in that experience, I was like, it is important for me to feel more confident, though, that I can protect this person in some kind of peaceful way. I don't know. That was important to me to try to discover what that is. And it still is important, because I don't have any desire to hurt anyone.
Right.
But I don't want to be hurt.
Yep.
Violence. I don't like violence, but there's something about Shaolin and this intersection here that I'm seeing that I just go, okay, there's something fluid about it and almost peaceful. Mm-hmm. So I don't even know where I'm going with that, but that's just my impression as somebody who has no knowledge of it.
Well, one thing about Buddhist practice is there's a term coined called appropriate response. So practicing Shaolin in its complexity, meaning we practice martial arts, we do Qigong for energetic development, we do sitting meditation to become very aware of our internal environment. These three practices that go together also help us connect to our environment more, so we have a better sense of maybe what's going on with another person. But it also helps us realize that in this engagement, what is the appropriate response? Now, just the desire to connect to someone else's higher self by itself might not have been the appropriate response in that moment.
Right.
So it develops our intuition and our sense of connectedness. So we also know in this situation, it's not just me and this other guy. I'm actually getting help from the whole universe through my intuition and through how I've developed my senses to trust my intuition on what the appropriate response is here. And I could also approach it calmly, because I've had the training. I have the trust in my training. I have the trust in my practice. But sometimes, so then it's also not giving up that this person doesn't have a best self. They do. They do have a best self. But maybe the approach at that time wasn't the right way to engage it.
That is a great advice. I mean, that's something I can take to heart and see how that really did play out as you just described. One way I've been trying to look at situations like that is as a doctor's prescription. When you go to the doctor, he doesn't give you just a tonic, the same tonic every time. It's like, well, what's going on today? How are we going to treat this, and what's the treatment? I'm trying to learn to bring that approach, a multi-armed, multi-directional approach into situations, because believing in a high idea doesn't mean that idea is applicable in that situation. Like I approach that completely wrong. I'd love to blame that person and say that the aggression was wrong, and maybe it was, but I I went in with a high idea, and that, as you stated, it wasn't appropriate. And that's a difficult lesson to learn because we want to see our ideas proved, you know?
Right. And that's, I mean, there's two things. Now, usually with martial art training, because you are getting punched in the face, you know, sooner or later, no matter how good you get, sooner or later, there's someone who's better.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's just the way it is, right? So it teaches you that there's a humility also in our approach to how we engage the world in spiritual matters, that we often can't know what's best individually as just myself. I can't know what's best for everybody.
Right.
Okay, so there's a humility there. But yet it also helps us keep our faith with us, because we know, even though I individually, with my frame of reference and my experience as Paula going through the world, I can't know what everybody needs. But I have faith that through my practice, I can connect to the larger environment, and I'm going to get that help to figure out what to do in this moment. It's not only me trying to figure it out. It's all those who walked before me. It's all those who are walking with me now. And it's all those who will walk in the future.
I love that.
And I'm connected to them, and they're helping me. And I have faith in that because I've experienced it in my practice.
Yeah, and I like that.
Now, that's where faith comes in, because people will be like, oh, that's a bunch of crap, you know? So I believe it because I know what I felt when I practice.
Yeah, you've tested it. You've put it into practice. That's
but
the word.
I can't quantify it. I can't create a mathematical formula or measure it with some kind of scientific tool. So that's where faith comes in.
Well, yeah, and you're bringing those things into your life, and then everybody else is going to bring it into their life. And each one of those things, while there may be similarities, there's going to be nuanced differences and extreme differences each time. Right. So it's got to sort of flow out into that world through each person, right?
Sure.
So I'm curious. I'm going to ask you to go back. I'd love to hear how you came to this path. I mean, where did you find this? Because I mean, you've been a teacher for what, over 25, 26 years now? Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, it's funny. Life is long, man. In the school of hard knocks, my friend.
Really?
No, I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. I grew up in a white working class immigrant, Polish immigrant community. I was raised, I was born in the 60s, so I went through the 70s, which was a very turbulent time in this country. Of course, I was a child, so I didn't realize it then.
Yeah.
But, it was a very violent time. It was a time when we were trying to put progressive policies in place, so there was a lot of social unrest. There was a lot of riots. It was an awful economy. There were a lot of laws passed for gender equality, for women's rights, all this stuff. So it was a very tumultuous time, and it was a very difficult time. And, in living in Chicago to this day, it's a violent town. You don't necessarily experience it all the time, but I'm not naive or inexperienced with violence, because, growing up, there was always people getting into stuff, and there were people that were getting harmed. Not so much gunfire at that time, but, there was always something going on.
Yeah.
So, I didn't go, nothing about my life is what the American dream is supposed to be, where, you go to school, you go to high school, you go to college, you get a career, all that kind of stuff, which I know realistically, even though that's our American dream, most people in America aren't living that.
That's right. That's true.
I mean, I know that. It's only a third of the population. So I always did well in school. I wanted to go to college, but it didn't work out. It just didn't work out. And I ended up getting a job down at the futures exchanges downtown, buying and selling contracts, financial industry. It was crazy. It was wonderful. I got the job because I needed a job, but I fell in love with it, and I managed to have a career down there for like 22 years. So here I am in the middle of really the cesspool of anything that could be bad about humanity. You're going to find there. But at the same time, there was always a spark of faith and spirituality that was present. And, I got married at a young age, and that marriage didn't work out. And it was a somewhat abusive relationship. And then that kind of brought me to it. And giving you the short version, it brought me to a bit of a spiritual crisis. And I did therapy and some 12-step stuff with that. And then that led to another marriage and a different type of flowering in my life. But that also didn't work out. And then that specifically led me to Kung Fu, to martial arts.
Really?
In the middle of all of that, though, I had been touched by Asian and Buddhist thought throughout my life.
Really? Interesting.
In very unusual ways. So I'll give you like one of the first ways. You know, when we were kids, we had no internet, so we'd go to the library, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Find all this knowledge there.
Yeah.
And sometimes you would just walk down the aisles in the library, just looking at all the different titles, and something might jump out at you.
Yeah.
So once I was there walking, I'm just running my finger along the books.
I love it. Yes.
And then all of a sudden, boom, this title stuck out at me. There are no secrets here. And I'm like, what?
What's that?
So I pulled out, and it's about Tai Chi, Chen Menqing, and his Tai Chi philosophy, and him teaching in New York. And that had a major influence on me. I was 13 years old. It was a different way of looking at the world and looking at everything. I finished it, put it back on the shelf, and I totally forgot about it.
But it planted something, yeah?
It planted something. And then junior year in high school, in a humanities class, we studied Siddhartha, which is Hess's book really about the historical Buddha. And that totally opened me up to Buddhist philosophy. And then from that point, I started looking into Buddhism more.
Interesting.
Here and there a little bit. But when I heard life is suffering and desire is the cause of all suffering, part of the Four Noble Truths, I can't come home. I'm like, oh my God, I already realized this, and somebody else actually thinks this way besides me.
I love this. I mean, that is something that I had a similar experience, obviously not the same exact thing, but it was when I first heard those things, the Four Noble Truths, the apparent truth of it was so obvious. It was like, oh, so someone has actually figured this out. That's kind of what it felt like, because it made me look back and go, yeah, I see this everywhere in my life. I can apply this and see this is true over and again. Oh my gosh. It was like a big light bulb moment. And it was so simple at the moment anyway to go. And it felt refreshing, I guess.
Right.
I didn't feel like alone on an island anymore, I guess.
Yes. It opens up that door. And, you know, as a teenager, you kind of have that teenage ennui, you know, and you're like, what's the point of wanting anything? Because if you want something, it just gets taken away. Or what's the point? If you're in a relationship, they don't like you anymore and they just go away, you know? So once you hear something like that in the middle of all of that, you're like, what?
Yeah. I love that. I love your description of that. You know, for me, it wasn't necessarily libraries, it was bookstores, but there was no internet, but it was the same thing. You know, it was just like, well, I don't know what's going on, but let me just try something. And, you know, you find a book that jumps out at you and you start there, and maybe they mention another teacher or a philosophy that you go, oh, I don't know what that is. That sounds interesting. And then you just sort of you pull the thread.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And one thing leads to another, and you find yourself in places you never thought you'd be.
Sure. Because
you're following wherever that interest is taking you. You know, it's wonderful. It's magical about life that it could be that way.
Sounds magical. I love listening to you tell it.
When I got old enough and kind of straightened up my act a little bit, I decided to go to college, to go back to school. I was taking a theology course. It was at a Catholic university here in Chicago, and a nun was teaching the course. And I already had some experience with 12-step programs. And even though I was raised strictly Catholic, the 12-step programs kind of opened up stuff that was already in Christianity, but I didn't realize it.
I get that. Okay.
You know, like getting your ego out of the way. And it's there. But I'm like, why did I never get this? And I brought it up to the teacher, and she goes, oh, don't you understand, though? The 12-step program is actually very Eastern in its mindset. It's been influenced by Eastern thought. And then that was it. I totally immersed myself then in Buddhism after that. Not meditation, though. just
Okay.
the Eightfold Path.
So, actions, like something you can do, something to practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I could not sit in meditation. There's no way I would try, because it's part of the Eightfold Path, and I couldn't sit still for 5 minutes.
Longtime Find the Good News listeners know that we often meander into topics on spirit, mysticism, religion, and wisdom traditions. If you are interested in these topics, I encourage you to seek out my new podcast, The Dawn Deacon with Brother Oran. On the Dawn Deacon podcast, I consider my small place in the whole of creation, asking the old questions that have perplexed human beings for ages. Why are we here? Is there a reason for our existence? How do we balm our sufferings, enlighten our minds, and awaken our hearts? Are there powers, energies, and realities just beyond our ability to comprehend them? On the Dawn Deacon podcast, I share the teachings, practices, and perspectives I have gathered as I've made my varied, sacred, ordinary way. I hope you'll join me at the Dawn Deacon podcast so that we can traverse this landscape together. Just search The Dawn Deacon with Brother Oran in your favorite podcast app or search engine, then subscribe. I get that. I mean, I've struggled, as we talked about at the beginning, I've struggled with, not struggled with stillness necessarily, but I've struggled with sitting in stillness. I consider it meditation. I spend more time in meditation walking than I do sitting.
Sure.
And I will, that to me has been a better practice for me, because I feel like and I know that's probably driven by ego too, but I feel like I'm accomplishing many things at once. I need the exercise. I sit a lot already in the job. So it's like, I need the doses of nature. It's like medicine for my mind and my spirit. So I feel like it's sort of like a package deal. But I get what you mean. I looked back after I started reading about meditation. I was like, okay, maybe I have been meditating, but not intentionally, not with intent,
Well, even one of my students the other day asked me how many times a week do I actually do sitting meditation. And she's like, you sit every day, right? And I'm like, no, I don't sit every day, because I count my other practices as meditation.
Ah, yeah, okay.
So when I'm doing a Shaolin form, which is a series of martial movements connected, that is meditation. When I'm doing Qigong, which is breathing and gentle movement incorporated with my breath, that is meditation. And so I sit maybe 3 to 4 times a week, but I really like doing the longer retreats.
Yeah.
Yeah,
diving in deeper, just like really making an intention to do that.
Absolutely. And each one of those, if you bring intention to each one of those practices, like when you walk in nature, mindful and focused, there's no reason to say that's not meditation, as long as your intention of being fully present is there.
Yeah, this is something that kind of intersects with something from Christianity that I've heard discussed to pieces, but it clicked for me one day. It was something Paul wrote, and he says, pray constantly without ceasing. And people were like, well, how do you pray without ceasing? And I've heard everybody's description of what they think that means. But I've described to people, I say, if I go canoeing, yes, I am canoeing, and that is an activity, and it is a sport. We have all these categories. But actually, I'm praying without ceasing when I'm doing that. My hands are praying when I'm pulling the paddle. My skin is praying when the wind blows through my, across my sweat. And so I try to take that. I look at it more, I guess, holistically in that regard. If I'm walking on the beach, my feet are praying in the sand.
Yes.
And so and that's hard to describe, I think. I really do think it's hard to describe to somebody that's saying, well, okay, that doesn't sound fun. I don't want to pray. I just want to go to the beach. I just want to canoe. And I'm like, yeah, it's like a fusion. It's just a subtle awareness that there's more going on in this activity. I guess really not even more going on. It's just presence, I guess, with the activity.
And this way we learn to take our spirituality into our entire life, because oftentimes when we have a spiritual practice, we segment it. We say, okay, I'm going to church now.
Yeah.
And then now here's the rest of my life.
Right.
How do you take that experience in church to the rest of your life? Or I'm sitting in meditation now. How do I take this experience off the cushion into the real world? Some of the things you're talking about, being mindful with canoeing, is a way to bridge that. And then feel how it feels to bring mind to movement in the real world. And then when we start interacting with people, maybe we'll have a sense of that as well, and we can bring it into that interaction.
Yeah.
But I agree with some of your other friends, too. You can't do that every single moment of your life.
Right. Sometimes you just got to throw a Frisbee and just be like, that was fun, right?
Exactly. Relax and, just watch a movie or whatever the case might be and distract yourself, because we're human, man.
You know what's funny? I say this to my wife because, I can be a very serious, somber person. But I told her one night, I was like, I know I'm a lot in that regard. But sometimes I just want to watch Predator again. With Arnold Schwarzenegger. I just want to watch Predator for the 400th time and just watch those dudes go through there and fight that thing. That's a joke because I watch Predator too much. But I told her, sometimes I just want to do that and I don't want to think about anything. I just want to just watch the entertainment, And
Star Trek.
I'm with you. Yeah, it's okay to just chill out, and not do that. You're right. It's a mixed bag. It has to be a mixed bag. It's kind of like, God, boy, this is going to be a weird analogy, but it's one of these drinks. I don't really like them, but it's those infused water, the like LaCroix.
Sure.
Like someone will say, I love the watermelon one. And I'm like, I can tell it's got watermelon in it. And sometimes I feel like my spiritual life is like LaCroix, right? It's like, I can I'm really canoeing, but it's been kind of just sort of essenced with the mindfulness or a practice. Do you know what I mean? It's like 90% of me is just having a good time, but then there's that 10% that's still got sort of a plugged in, I guess. Mm-hmm. I can see how something like Qigong would inform a lot of things in your life, though, right? Once you begin that type of practice, I can imagine it starts to infuse or essence other areas.
It does, but it happens organically. So you really don't know how it'll affect any given person's life.
Interesting.
Because again, we're totally complex. We have our unique filters. We have our own experiences that we bring to the practice. This is one thing I also like about Shaolin is I don't have to, when the student walks through the door, I don't have to determine exactly what's wrong with them.
Right.
I just need to teach them Kung Fu.
Yeah.
And the Kung Fu itself, because there's no way for me to completely know this person. I don't care if they're at my school 5 days a week. And we know this from our most intimate relationships. Your spouses, your kids, your other relatives, they continue to surprise, right? Depending on the conditions that you all find yourselves in. People are constantly changing in very subtle and sometimes gross ways. So it's impossible to completely know anybody. But if I just teach good Kung Fu, good alignment, good breath practice, good sitting, if I create a nice container that could sustain that practice for somebody, the practice is going to give that person what they need organically and naturally. I don't need to, like you said, create a prescription for them. It's going to happen because they're plugged in.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seems like it's fluid.
Stress off the teacher too. It takes a lot of stress off the teacher.
Yeah.
You don't have to. You don't necessarily have to apply your analytical mind, your intellectual mind, to every person that walks through the door.
So, where does your intersection with that begin? I get your story. I interrupted you and took us way off in another path here, but
fine.
So, you get interested in Buddhism and Eastern thought. And so at what point do you begin to really narrow that down and go, I found, Shaolin, Kung Fu, Qigong. When does that happen? How does that happen for you? I think it's fascinating.
Question.
Just slowly.
Just more happy accidents.
Yeah.
So here I have Buddhist thought in the Eightfold Path, and I'm trying to apply that in whatever way makes sense. I don't have a formal teacher or anything like that. I'm doing, again, radio shows, reading books, because that's what we used to call podcasts. Remember?
Yeah, that's right.
Life changes so much in life. It's like, woo. So I was married a second time. And, I said, like, my first relationship was abusive. I don't want to make it sound like I'm, black
No, I
and
get
blue.
it. It's a part of your life, though. It's work.
Yeah, So the second one that I married was complete opposite of the first one in my mind. And we were having some kind of discussion about something. And it was calm. It wasn't even a fight. But we were dissecting some kind of problem. And he didn't like my response to something, and he came toward me with his fist raised. And I was shocked as well. And now growing up on the south side of Chicago, in some ways, that when someone comes at you with your fist raised, the worst thing to do is to take 2 steps back like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That's not usually the best thing, even if you're terrified.
Yeah.
So I did that, and what happened is, literally, no lie, Oran, a switch went off in my mind and said, you need to take martial arts.
Wow.
Right as I took that step back with my hand on my mouth. I had no interest in martial arts whatsoever. It wasn't on my radar.
But it's like in the moment, you're just immediately, I can imagine that, but it's like a strike of lightning, right? Like,
right.
I won't ever have to feel this way again. I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to be out of control. I mean, it probably had a lot to do with that, I'm sure. Like, I don't want to be in this position again.
Exactly. Because I'm like, okay, I had the problems with number one. I went through therapy and 12-step and all this stuff, and I figured I got my act together, and I have this Buddhist thought and all this kind of stuff. And then this man who really was a genuinely kind man and everything. So I'm like, well, obviously I'm bringing this out of people somehow.
Oh, no.
And honestly, it wasn't like I was blaming him. Seriously. I'm like, I don't know why I'm bringing this out, but I need to figure this out. And if I'm going to continue to bring this out, I need to figure out what to do about it.
That's interesting.
Self-defense is, in some ways, could be easy when you don't know the person. Because you have permission, and this is what I mean when I say I was in an abusive relationship, and I don't want to make it sound like, I was afraid to do anything and all this kind of stuff, because I grew up on the South Side. We got into fights. I knew what that was like. I knew what it was like to have to kind of duke it out with somebody. But what happens when it's the person you love?
Yeah, that's true. God, that is so true. I mean, I've been married twice, currently in my second marriage, hopefully my last marriage. I have no indication it would be any different than that. But my first one, it ends up where the person that you love, that you get married to, ends up becoming the person that's hurting you and is your enemy. It is a very complicated thing. Very complicated. For me, that rewired things in my head, like permanently, that I still... trust issues that I still like. They're there. They influence. I'm aware of them, but I have to watch them, because when they start to vibrate and play their little notes, I'm like, oh, is that? Do I have a clear view of this situation? Or has this? Or am I still being influenced by this broken trust? But it has to do with because I cared for that person. If I didn't care about them, it wouldn't have influenced me the same way.
Right.
So
it's
strange.
It's a ball of wax, man, when you care about somebody.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with violence at all, you also know if you decide to engage, now again, this is just being a kid in the city, if you decide to engage, it could escalate. And it could escalate even more, and it could escalate even more. And then before you know it, someone's in jail for the rest of their life.
Man.
All right, now what happens if you decide to engage with someone you love?
Yeah.
Because you already have that passion.
Yeah.
So it's not going to end well.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean with domestic abuse. If you have two people who are going to duke it out with each other in that passion, it's not going to end well.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it almost relies on someone taking a passive role, right?
Yeah. Golly, man.
I mean, it's
yeah,
just, that's nuts. So that's what I mean. Like, here I'm thinking, this is the hubris, though, right? I'm thinking, yeah, I got my shit together now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then someone who I consider to be a kind of passive, nice man raises his fist to me. I'm like, yeah, something's still off here, and I got to figure out what it is. But the universe gave me that answer to take martial arts.
Yeah.
And again, Kung Fu, it wasn't like I said it's got to be Kung Fu, because Kung Fu has something to do with Buddhism. I just started exploring different martial arts schools.
Yeah.
I went to one that was close to my house. They had a female black sash there, which at that time was a little bit more unusual. She was short like me, had a lot of energy. I could tell the men around her respected her and liked her.
Okay.
Even though she was loud and kind of crazy, you know, and all this. Because in my mind, I'm like, maybe that's why people want to hit me. Because you have to figure this is, 25 some years ago. Because things are a little bit different now. I'm like, yeah, they seem to like her, so I'm going to sign up here because they could probably put up with me.
I get it. I mean, it makes sense,
and
right?
It so happened to be Kung Fu. That's what I mean, like dumb luck.
Yeah.
It just so happened to be Kung Fu.
How interesting.
Now, none of them, because they did martial arts, they couldn't answer my question of, like, they were just doing the martial arts, right? They didn't care about the Buddhist side.
Right. This is just the physicality, right?
Right. So I'm like, what does this have to do with Buddhism? Because I already knew about Buddhism, and I knew it's nonviolent. I knew you're not supposed to kill. You're not supposed to fight. You're not supposed to hurt people. Like, what is this going on here? And they're like, I don't know. We're just doing martial arts, man.
Yeah. Okay.
So you don't need the Buddhism to do Kung Fu.
I gotcha. It's kind of like you can go canoeing without having to, it's like what we were talking about earlier. I can just do the thing. I don't have to worry about the philosophy and all that and bring that with me.
Right. Or you could have someone row for you.
Yeah, right.
I know that's really off topic.
It's true, though. I mean, that's a shortcut, right? I mean, and so you're in a situation where you're learning the physicality, but you've already been imprinted by the spiritual teachings.
Right.
So you're bringing that into the Kung Fu studio. I don't know what the right word is, so
right.
Forgive
yeah,
me.
No, that's fine. Yeah, studio is fine. So that was that. And a lot of questions, but no concrete answers.
Yeah.
And then China started opening up more.
Okay. What year is this?
So now we're about 92.
Okay.
93.
Gotcha.
And one of the first Shaolin monks to establish himself in the United States, Shoyan Ming, he's based in New York, but he came to Chicago. He just had gotten here. He still didn't have a school or anything. And he did a seminar at my Kung Fu school.
Oh, did
And
he?
so I'm like, oh, good. Finally, I could actually ask a Shaolin monk, what does this have to do with Buddhism?
Yeah, how do these two things go together? That's great. Okay.
Can't speak English, so there's a Chinese teacher there translating for us. So finally, we're doing our stuff, and people say, if you have any questions for Shoyan Ming, and of course, my heart is pounding, because, it's something that you really care about.
Yeah.
Open it up in front of all these people. So I asked him, I'm like, Buddhism teaches nonviolence. It teaches not to kill. So how can martial arts be part of Buddhist practice? And he went like this, and he looked at me, and he said, I don't know.
Oh, man. Wow.
And he goes, this is a question we've been trying to answer for ourselves at Shaolin for
Interesting.
hundreds of years.
That's a good answer, but that is a confounding answer.
It's a very Zen answer. Because Zen doesn't want to put a format, a structure. I shouldn't say structure, but it doesn't want to give you a definitive answer so that you can't ever find another way.
Okay.
It doesn't want to put you in a bottle. It wants you to continuously ask questions.
Yeah. So it
Remember
keeps
that softness you were talking about, that heart, that soft heart? It wants you to be able to maintain that softness, that openness, that inquisitiveness, and that curiosity.
And so that answer probably made you more curious, I'm assuming, at that moment. And that pulled you towards Shaolin, right?
And trying to hopefully have someone in my life that could answer those questions. But at that point, that person wasn't there.
I see. I can see that being, for some people, I can even speak for myself, maybe not in that same category, but I mean, there's times when I've got involved in something because of my perception. Like, I wanted to know more, gosh, I don't really want to, let me just say, like, there was like a religion that I was interested in, and I had an idea about it, and I had done my own research, and I thought, there was a layer to it that I was highly interested in. Mm-hmm. But what I found to get to that layer was that I had to get through a lot of stuff that I just didn't agree with, like really just fundamentally did not agree with. And what I discovered was that layer was very thick and very populated. Yeah. And the layer that I was trying to get to was very thin and not populated. And I didn't really have the time. I didn't feel like I had the time to devote to get through the thick layer. And it was disappointing. Mm-hmm. So I just said, I need to back out. I need to back out now. This isn't worth persevering through. I think I'm just crashing because it's going to feel like I'm beating my head against the wall,
right?
To get where I want to get. And so I backed out. So I could see someone getting into I'm just a hypothetical person, could get into Kung Fu, but bring their own Buddhism with them, and then get in the wrong studio maybe, and be like, oh, this is just the physicality. I want more, and then not be able to find the more in a teacher. That could be disheartening, I think.
And I would say for a lot of martial artists, that does happen quite often. It's like anything, because you engage with the physical practice, but eventually if there's not more substance there, something's missing, but you don't really know what it is. And you realize you're basically just in an exercise class.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay. Oh, man. I'm just drawing that line between what I just told you, and it's so similar, even though it's in a religious context. It was the same type of situation, where I'm going, wait, we're just saying these prayers on repeat. There's no passion, no spirit. We're just doing this automated robotic stuff. And when you ask someone why, they're like, I don't worry about that. This is just what we do. And I'm like, whoa. I'm excavating here, I'm not going to be able to accept just a whatever kind of answer. Yeah, I get that. So I could see that comparison with martial arts. Like, that's exactly what I felt like the way you were. Like, I realized I was just in an exercise class, and I wasn't. Yeah, that was very similar. So
I lucked out. Other people that were at that school could see, and other people have been doing martial arts for a while, they could see that I was searching for things. Yeah. And they tried to point me in the right directions with like other teachers that maybe they knew about, but they didn't really study under, but they kind of knew, like they were into it more, or they were more energetic with it, or whatever label someone might put on what they saw.
Okay.
So they pointed me to another teacher who I eventually got my black sash from. Okay. And he's the first one who could at least give me some kind of answer about what does Buddhist practice have to do with martial arts. And he said, well, I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not interested in Buddhism. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. He said, but I could tell you what I know about martial arts. And you could tell me if maybe it's similar to Buddhism, because I don't really know.
Interesting.
Exactly, right?
It's interesting, yeah.
And it's just wonderful.
I love this.
So he goes, if you take martial arts to your highest level, when you're in conflict with somebody else, it really isn't you against the other person. You're really trying to connect to that person energetically. And when you connect to them energetically, when you actually become one with that person, then you could dissipate the aggression. Now, this goes back to your situation with your neighbor.
Yeah.
You wanted to do that. You really wanted to do that when you tried to connect with him and open up. But the skill set wasn't there to connect where that guy was energetically.
Yeah, right.
And if you made that connection with him on a high level in martial art practice, you could temper, like once that person kind of is symbiotic with your energy, you're tempering their aggression then.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are layers to that. So if you're not a very accomplished martial artist, it happens first physically. And then if you're good at Qigong, maybe you could look them in the eye and you could energetically somehow connect there. And if you're really highly skilled, you're doing it on all those levels, physical, energetically, and you're connecting to the wider universe, which I keep coming back to. You're getting the help from everybody to kind of balance that out, kind of make it a little broader and wider, so the intensity of it could dissipate a little bit.
You've said that, and I want you to, if you can, dive into that so the listeners that aren't familiar with what you're saying understand. When you say you're getting help from everybody, what do you mean?
All the life in our universe
is like,
and that means not only sentient, not only human, because when you practice Qigong, we know everything in our universe is comprised of different types of energetic signatures. And we're connected to all of it. You know how they say that we're made out of stars?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're connected to all of it. But for all of us, most of us, that's an intellectual concept that's really hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
When you practice any of these disciplines, and again, it doesn't have to just be sitting meditation because we don't know the uniqueness of each individual. But when you practice certain disciplines that allow you to start to connect to all those energetic signatures, you start realizing that all of this energy is available to you, and not only what's here right now, but if you break away the constructs of time, people who have lived in the past, the people who are living right now, and the people who are going to live in the future, all of that in this sphere, all of that is available to us.
Okay. I like this.
This is cool, too. Let me tell you something one of my other Dharma teachers told me when speaking specifically, because I like to always go back to our real lives. Because, you have this big concept and you're like, well, okay, yeah, that could be a dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as teachers and all of us as people out in the world, as we're moving about our lives, there are times where you feel very physically drained. And sometimes more drained than others. And it might be when you're around a certain situation or certain people and you're like, man, why do I feel so fatigued? And what he told me is because the ego is involved and you are trying to find a set solution that you have in your mind over this situation. Okay, so let's say you're a boss and you want your employee to do something. And, this is part of our lives, right? They have to do their job. And you keep trying a certain way to get this person to do their job. And they just keep resisting you. You could always fire them, but that's the easy way out, right? So you keep trying and you're getting exhausted by it. My Zen teacher will say, well, you're getting exhausted because you're putting your ego onto the situation and you're seeing an end solution that is only one solution. So you need to open your heart, open your thinking, get your individual ego out of the way a little bit. Let the energy of the universe kind of come through, and you're going to get a different solution to this problem. You're going to find a different way to approach this problem. And when you could open up, allow your intuition to kind of feel and create an idea from that energy coming through you, then you could apply that different solution that pops into your mind. And you won't feel as drained. Oh. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But then you might find another solution if you keep your mind and heart open.
I love everything you just said. I love it because it is practical, and it can be difficult to get your ego out of the way in the rapid fire situational world that we live in. I mean, you know, it's like just so many decisions. I mean, I feel that just on a day-to-day basis when I sit down in the morning to do my project lists for the day. I can make this every day. I make a structure. I mean, it helps guide the day. I know who I need to contact and the projects that are in front of me and how much time I've allotted. But every day I know. I mean, I've been doing it for over 20 years. I know there's going to be things that are going to jump in from the sides and just take this Jenga block I've made and just start pulling the pegs out and make it unstable. The more unstable it becomes, the amount of energy I spend trying to keep that Jenga tower from falling down completely is all about ego then. I mean, at that point, I'm completely about my discomfort and trying to keep other people comfortable and make all these things happen, and all my focus gets put on that. But you're right on when I can get out of that mode and go, hang on, let the energy of the universe literally become like a conduit. My wife would say a spigot, you know, like clear out all the little nozzles on your shower head, you know, so they're all firing a good stream of water. Then you get a different look at that Jenga block. And so, on certain days, I'll just go, oh, it's okay. I'm going to let it fall down today, and I'm just going to pick the pieces up that I think I can handle. And then the whole thing works out. It's fine.
Right.
But it's hard. It is hard not hard. It's just how easy to fall into the trap of ego it is daily, to just get caught in that wheel of just things to do and people to communicate with and make happy or sad and all these little things you're trying to balance. It's just not conducive. And I don't want to live like that. And I know it's not. I know that world is out there. I know that being a different way is out there, but boy, it is different. It's difficult. There's a little piece from Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, I think, where he says, beside the pulling and hauling stands what I am. And I remember when I read it, it was like just seared in my memory, because I was like, oh gosh, that's what I want to be, the what I am that's beside the pulling and hauling.
Mm-hmm. Well, inherently though, the pulling and hauling is so much part of our human experience.
It is, yeah.
So one thing the Shaolin also teaches us to do, though, is to accept that as part of our spiritual journey, completely also embrace the difficulty. And oftentimes in spiritual practice, in so many ways, we think we're going to get to a place where nothing's ever going to be difficult anymore. Right,
and that's not true.
And we judge ourselves. Like, I'm not woke if it's hard.
Right. No, it's true, guys. Oh, man.
That's not true. And one thing about Shaolin is we look very closely at what the human experience actually is. And once we could accept that the difficulty and the friction is also part of our practice, it makes the practice easier to embrace.
Interesting.
We can't have the difficulty without the openness and the equanimity, but we can have the openness and the equanimity without the difficulty, because we wouldn't know that it's openness and equanimity if we never felt the friction.
Yeah, this makes me think of like a key to a door, you know? I mean, when you go, I have the key to my front door to my home, and I have one that's new and one that's old. And the older one slides in the lock so easily and the door turns, but the newer one I have to kind of wiggle it still, you know, and turn it because it's just got sharp edges on it. They haven't been worn down yet. It's not doesn't fit quite right. It works, but it's still a little clunkier than the older one, you know.
And is this then what our life is, you know? Like, you're asking the big questions with every guest you have, right? What is this human life? What is it about? Why are we here? What are we doing? So is this inherently part of it?
Yeah, I think I read somewhere, and my son and I were talking about this. I don't know where I read it. After a while, everything blends together. But it was, you know, talking about the realm of the gods. And it was like the gods want to come here, because it's so blissful in these blissful realms that they can't learn anything. Yeah. And, you know, but at the same time, they too were humans that arrived at this blissful realm only to wish to return. It's like we strive to get to this place, as you described, that's everything's okay and we're not struggling and there's no suffering. But the very action of trying to get to that place gets us to a place where we actually perhaps would desire to return to this place. It's an interesting thing to really sit and wrap your head around. When you were talking about something earlier, I was thinking about some experiences I've had where, well, I guess when you were saying that they're there to help us, everyone and everything. And I think about this sometimes when I look back on particularly hard instances in my life where that clarity would then sort of rest on me at some point, where it would just like, even in the midst of great suffering, and even if I were feeling it in 100% ego, when this sort of elixir would sort of come, it was always this feeling that it was just me. And a few times I've even described it as me telling me, well, we've already done this, so it's okay. It's like it's like another version of me from some other place that's almost, it's like everything's already done, if that makes any sense. It's like the sphere of time and space sort of melts away, and it's like future, past, present is all one thing. And it's like, well, it's okay because you've already died. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's like the way...
Not necessarily. If you, like Buddhism teaches there's multiple lives, not everybody believes that. I do believe that our energetic, we're unique energetic signatures right now, but I do believe our energy gets recycled. And for me, even before I looked at Buddhist practice, if you look at the world around you, if you say, okay, we're in a natural world, we're on the earth, if we look at the natural world around us for some kind of sense of what's going to happen to us, we see the seasons renewing life on earth over and over. So I take a lot of comfort in that somehow that must be something that happens to us.
Yeah, I kind of chuckled one day. I listened to a lot of comedians, and somebody asked this comedian that I follow if he believes in reincarnation, and he said, well, I mean, I was already born once, so I mean, that's kind of amazing. And and he was like, so I mean, why couldn't it happen again? And the way he said it was such this jovial, nonchalant, but he made a good point. He was like, well, it's already an amazing thing already happened. I was born and I took on this body and have consciousness. Why couldn't that another amazing thing happen? And I was like, he's kind of got a good point. It's not as heavy when you look at it that way as just a thing that happens, Right. And as you pointed to nature.
Yeah, and you know how sometimes, I think everybody experiences this, that you feel you have experience in things that you really shouldn't.
Yeah.
You might find a situation and you're like, wow, I'm vaguely familiar with this. Or you're attracted to certain things in life that you're like, wow, where did that come from? So I feel like those are leftovers from previous incarnations. Yeah. But I don't think that, like, as far as Paula Lazarz goes, I'm not going to be reborn as Paula.
Right.
This is a unique set of circumstances, and it's a one-time thing. So this goes back to Christian thought. Like, I don't think Paula's going to live again. That self-identity and that conglomerate.
Yeah, because what is it? Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a one-time shot.
Yeah, all this stuff is just, exactly. I mean, it's like, I think of it as like a vacuum cleaner. Life is like that. You're just sucking stuff up into the bag, and at the end, whatever you rolled over during your life is kind of makes your identity, and that's what's in the bag at the end, but that's not really whatever that is. That's just an accumulation of elements. I mean, yeah, it's that stuff's really fascinating to me. The whole timeline idea, and looking at it as a sphere, and then ancestors, and things like that, where it's like, okay, well, if is the past still a thing? Is my in the past a relative is still there? They're still living, if that makes sense, and if we don't look at it in a linear way, it kind of changes the energy of the way. Right. An ancestor could be sending energy forward, and maybe one from the future could be sending it back, and then you're doing the same. It's a beautiful kind of cycle that And I could ramble about that for probably 2 hours and never get anywhere, but it's kind of a beautiful thing that is very helpful to some degree, comforting.
Well, I have a crackpot theory about everything. So
I'd love to hear a crackpot theory.
I was saying that I don't believe, like Paula, once I'm gone, Paula's not going to exist again. But for people who knew me, and now this goes back to what does the human form do for us, right? I do believe that when you think about, let's say, for example, a dead relative, you're creating the structure, the energetic structure for them to exist again. They're not existing in the physical form, but they are very much alive through the synapses and the thought process of you remembering them. They are still very much alive, and they're very much with you. It's almost like you create a matrix when you think about them for that energetic signature to come together again and communicate with you.
I think that is so helpful. I mean, that is so helpful the way you outlined that, because we all often hear that as sort of like just a quip that maybe is said to comfort people who've lost someone, where they say, well, they still live in your heart. They still live in your memory. And as long as you were told to remember them, they're living. And I've said things like that, but only to avoid having to get too much deeper, because you just don't know what everyone's willing to accept. But I think what you just said there, that gets into some territory that I think is very helpful, very, very helpful and comforting, but also perhaps very real. Like that's more tangible than maybe we realize when we say things like that we actually are forming.
Well, one thing, when we talk about pain for humans, and we know most of us have all experienced some kind of pain in our life, and we know that when we are in the throes of it, we do feel very much alone, like you said, Oran. So I think anything that can encourage a person to not feel cut off and alone is helpful. And I firmly believe, as we keep coming back to, that there is help there. So just getting a crack in the mind and a bit of the heart and the mind to open, if it only is a relative that might be gone, that someone felt very close to and has fond memories, if they could hold that person, if they're in pain and they could hold that person in their heart and they could believe that person is with them, it's going to help ease their pain. And that's a beginning on the step to recovery from pain. But we're in this together, and the more isolated we feel, we see this, in everything that's going on in our world. The more isolated we feel, or the more entrenched we get into separate groups, the more painful our life experience is.
Yeah, that's true.
We can't have an opinion, but we need to find ways to connect with each other.
Yeah, little bridges. I mean, I'll take a little bridge any day of the week, just a small one. I'm okay with that. I mean, I can disagree with someone on a lot of things, but if we can find something in common that we can do together that actually helps people, then that widens that bridge over time, I find. The more people that traverse that space. And that's what I'd really like to see happen in the world. I think we desperately need that right now, because we're not doing so great in that department.
Well, that's one thing with Shaolin as well. It attracts people from all different walks of life. And I believe that it's not only Shaolin, but it's other things could do this too. We're coming together and sharing an activity. It doesn't require us to discuss our political views, our religious views necessarily, because we're doing a physical practice. We're engaging with each other in this practice, whether it's even sitting in meditation or actually doing forms in martial arts or practicing Qigong together. And it's connecting us as human beings with each other before we actually start opening our mouths and having some kind of conversation. So you could feel a trust and companionship with people before you really even start talking to them. And that's an actual good place to start.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that I think, having my trust broken, kind of jumping back to that earlier marriage, having my trust broken, while as bad as it was, and while it did leave me with things to deal with, it has made me look at trust differently. It made me seek it more. And maybe I hold people to a different standard than I did in the past, but I don't think that's necessarily an unhealthy thing. It's made me be a more proactive truster, if that makes any sense.
Right. No, it does make a lot of sense, because we have to acknowledge that people could change.
Yep.
So you're trusting people in the moment, and you're putting one foot in front of the other. But really, to expect someone to be exactly the same person for any given individual. So like if I'm in a relationship to someone and I'm kind of demanding they be exactly the same person for the next 20 years, that's not fair to them.
That's right.
And I'm going to trust them as if they're exactly the same. Come on, man.
I'm with you. One of the things that I've thought over and over and again about people who've hurt me, especially the ones way in the past, I say this little mantra to myself, especially when I'm struggling with maybe forgiveness or letting something go. I'll say, hey, they're not the one who hurt you, even though they have that person's name and address and their zip code and their phone number, but that's not the person who hurt me, because if they were, then that means I've cast them in stone with a plaque on it at that point in time. And I'm not that way. Right. I know I've changed. So people do change. Now, granted, they may still hurt you again. That's true. But at some point, they're going to have to change. We're not fixed. Mm-mm. So I have this is like going to deviate a little bit, but I see that you're consulting on the new CW show, Kung Fu. Is that accurate?
I'm not consulting.
You're not consulting?
The local
okay.
Station just had me do some promo spots for it.
Okay. I kind of didn't understand what was going on with that.
Yeah, no, we did some promo spots. That was my first exposure really to any kind of Asian disciplines, was the original show Kung Fu.
Yeah, with David Carradine.
With David Carradine.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. The people that come to do Kung Fu with me, I know a lot of them have that ideal in their mind, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a full-time martial artist, and for those of us that do Kung Fu full-time, there's not many. We like to say we're living the dream.
Right.
So I always tell people, yep, I'm living the dream, man. I'm living the dream. But anyway, there is a lot of difference now with the new show. I saw the pilot.
Yeah, me too.
That's okay. It's made for younger people. Their way of engaging with the world is different, and I'm sure it's going to bring the practice to a whole new generation of people.
Yeah.
Through that perspective,
Well, I did watch their promos. Are they the ones where you're teaching different things? There's a whole series of them. Yeah, I thought they were really cool. I was like, well, this is cool. Especially, for me, I was like, wow, this is something you can just do, right? And it could be that first step for somebody who's going, well, look, I couldn't do Kung Fu. But then they see the videos and the way they're structured, and they're real short, like, 2.5 minutes long?
Not even that, Oran.
Okay,
they're
not
1 minute. Teach Kung Fu in 1 minute.
Yeah.
I was joking with my friends. I'm like, you're a master when you can teach Kung Fu in less than a minute.
Well, I thought they were really cool. My thought was this could be like the perusing the library books, and this could be one of these things where somebody's like, oh, this position feels good. Or when I stand like this, I feel a certain way. And it's like a certain, it could be that one little thing where they're like, I remember watching these promo videos. I mean, it happens to people that way. Yeah.
I hope so. Because we're not all going to be Bruce Lee,
Well, I mean, even that, like Bruce Lee, to me, that's interesting how entertainment can skew the way you view things. Mm-hmm. And Bruce Lee is one of those kind of figures to me that I still don't know how I process him, because I just go, okay, I was introduced to him through action films. Right. And so my mind, I see him as an action movie star. It's kind of like Steven Seagal was in that category when I was younger too. And I was like, Steven Seagal, wow, he's kicking ass, and breaking bones, and it was cool. I mean, I hate to say it, but back when I was young, I was like, man, he's beating the hell out of these bad guys, and it like felt good, revenge movies or whatever. And then get older, and I'm like, what was he doing? And you sort of go, oh, Aikido. And then you start to scratch the paint, and you're like, what the heck? How did we get from this to these hyper violent, bone breaking, smashing people through windows and stuff?
Yeah.
And so I guess if you don't ever scratch the paint, you might just get that part of it. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, fighting was there first, really. I mean, the need for people to physically defend themselves goes back to the beginning of mankind. So really, the question is, how did we get to Aikido from this bone-breaking,
interesting,
elbow-knocking,
I see.
So that's really the question.
That's interesting. Yeah, I get you. Peace, love, and harmony wasn't the root. It came. That's interesting because
from what anthropologists and historians tell us, none of us were there.
Yeah, well, like if you read The Way of Peace and you're just going, wow, this is an incredible. You could live by that book, and go and consider that the root of the physical manifestation of Aikido, and then maybe see, there you go again. If you don't pull the thread far enough, you just don't know. So Kung Fu, I guess, in Bruce Lee was
embracing all of it, not just picking out threads that seem nicer.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I saw in a documentary somebody called it enlightenment, and he was calling it like the California culture. And that's no slight on California. I don't know what's like over there, but he was just kind of saying like it's sort of like a upper class spirituality, where you can pick and choose and curate your little basket of what feels good. Mm-hmm. But if it gets any kind of trouble or suffering, gets kind of shut out. And I was like, that's not going to work for me in my life,
Right.
I don't need that kind of fruit basket. I need, something that's got some tools that can actually go through some things.
Right. And I agree with you. And then for me personally, and again, we can't speak to other people's experiences and what they find helpful, right? But for me personally, I was in too much pain for that to work.
Right.
Just having that, well, try this, try that, maybe this, maybe that. I mean, I had to go a lot deeper because I was hurting too bad.
Yeah, I get it. Like I was robbed recently, and once I haven't been robbed, I don't know if I've ever been robbed to this scale. And there were sentimental things that were stolen, and like goods that you've worked for. Yeah, it's been complicated. Like, believe it or not, it's like been an exercise for me to like look at myself. And I hate to say it, but like I'm actually kind of glad in some ways because it's revealed like some pretty darker things, like, in me, like angers that I think I've got. Because I would say, man, I'm angry about this. And then when I pull on it, I was like, oh, I'm not just angry that they stole the stuff. Now I'm angry that we live, like this anger's bigger. This was just sort of the thing that revealed it, right? I started to look at society and then my city, and it was like this web that kept expanding. I was like, so like I was looking at at some of the domino effect that creates the situations like this. And,
right.
And then the other thing is, can I process this in a healthy way? Because I can't do anything about it. 100% victim. So I'm like, I have no power over this at all. It's done. The loss is real, and again, it's just stuff, but at the same time, it was just more complicated for me, to work through. And it's been an interest. I'm still working through it, to be truthful. Yeah.
In our practice, we're always trying to, in a sense, pick at scabs that people have. So that, and this is exactly what you're talking about. When you have an experience and then you feel some primal emotions or extreme emotions that maybe you didn't expect, and you're looking at kind of your own dark side, let's say. Yeah. When you could look at your own dark side and then say, okay, I have this in me. It's not easy to look at that. It's easy to look at other people's dark side and be kind of judgy about it. But when we start feeling things, it's important to look at it courageously. Because if we could really understand when we feel anger or when we want revenge or when we feel frustration, or whatever the case might be, all those emotions and those mind states that, we push against, if we could really understand them, then when we go out in the world, we can really understand them when they happen in other people.
Yeah.
And then we can think of an appropriate response, because we're not like, well, you feel that way, but I never feel that way.
Right.
You could go, you know what, brother? I know how that feels.
Yes.
I know how that feels. And when I was feeling like that, well, maybe, talk to me wouldn't have worked for me.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Or whatever might work.
No,
maybe
you're totally right.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, you have to be honest about your own humanity before you could fix any problems. And Shaolin practice forces you to constantly look at the truth of your own humanity. Because when you're sparring with somebody else, you don't have a choice. It's going to bring out things.
Yeah.
Like when your good friend punches you in the face.
Yeah.
Are you going to get passive, or are you going to go, man, I want to, and then go, whoa, that's my good friend, and I was just willing to take his head off.
Yeah. Well, it's like, reminds me of that old Mike Tyson quote everybody loves. It says, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It's
exactly.
like, yeah, it's true. I mean, getting into an altercation or even just a conflict or sparring, I imagine, I mean, it makes things really sharp. I'm sure, very present. One of my last guests was just talking about this. He was actually in the military, and he was talking about being in combat in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And he told me a story that was really, I got highly interested when he brought it up. He was in the middle of a firefight, and he was telling me about this butterfly that he keyed in on. And he said it was like 30 seconds, but it felt like forever. He said, and it was like I couldn't really at that point tell you the difference between me and that butterfly. And he said I knew I was it. And he said it was like the conflict itself had heightened his, I guess, that moment, and I was like, it was just fascinating the way it changed his perception and the lasting effect that it had even post conflict, on the way he was looked at the world and that landscape, and even the rain, just everything changed.
And that's it. Like, no one would want that experience on themselves, but this extreme experience he had opened up his connection to the universe. So sometimes we don't know, like sometimes you can't open that up by just coddling people. Sometimes it does take an extreme experience, but you trust the universe to provide it to you, because no one would say, yeah, let's take a bunch of people and put them on the battlefield and have people pointing guns at them so maybe they could open up spiritually. Like, you wouldn't do that to someone, but he found himself in that situation, and that's what happened for him.
Yeah, that's getting into some kind of almost like Vision Quest type territory. Yes. Even. I mean, it's very similar what it sounds like. I mean, even kind of jumping, we brought up Christianity a few times. I mean, that's kind of how I've placed even Jesus in my life. That whole passion. I mean, we just came through Easter, and I'm like, look, that's not just a contract. For me, I look at that and I'm like, no, there's something happening here that's very Vision Quest-like. And it is horrible, gruesome pain and suffering. And the counterweight to that is this love that we keep hearing about that is like endless and boundless, broken through this terrible torture, tragedy situation. I'm like, that makes some sense. It's horrible to have to think that that's what it takes, but there's this strange door that seems to open there.
And I agree with you. It's almost like it's hard to engage with it because one could be afraid what other people might think if you engage with it too much. Yeah. Kind of like Mel Gibson made The Passion, right?
Yeah,
it's like, wow, why is he so attracted to violence? You know?
Right.
But I think you're right. Like there's a message, and it's almost like we don't want anyone to suffer ever, so we can't almost say this, right?
Yeah.
But there's a message in the crucifixion. Now, and Jesus' willingness to accept it.
Yeah, to enter that.
And it was the way of his Father, and his Father was asking this of him, and he had free will. He could have walked away, but he was willing to accept what he had to go through.
Yeah.
And and again, this kind of like now throwing back to Zen, here's another question for us as humans that we could hold with us on our spiritual path. What does this mean? Why was it important that Jesus go through this? Why is this an important aspect of the Christian story? What does it mean for us as human beings? What does it mean about pain?
Yeah.
What does it mean about suffering?
Yeah, well, even that whole thing about the realm of the gods and you can't learn without coming here. It's like that idea is infused in there too. It's like, nope, there's a way and there's a price. Oddly enough, it's like this is the price for something else to occur. And it seems crazy, I know, and this is a weird conversation. Some people would just go, "No, look, this is advocating suffering and pain," but I don't know how to really. Sometimes the language just falls apart, when I'm trying to talk about this subject with someone, because I'm like, look, that's a mystery. This is one of these spots where it's so hard to really quantify. I think it really is, but it is interesting. I mean, it's very similar to what you're talking about.
I think sometimes, like, if we can't have real conversations about pain, we're closing the door to spiritual practice for a lot of people, because a lot of people might feel that their pain isn't understood.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
And this kind of goes back to some of what you were talking about, ways in America that people practice their spirituality can feel closed to a lot of the population because their pain they don't feel their pain is being acknowledged.
Yeah.
Or understood.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. Even just, I guess the word I use sometimes is shunning. Maybe that's the word, and maybe it's not the right word, but it's like, that I have real trouble with things like that, where it's like a message of love and universal love and acceptance, but then you find that there's barriers based on all kinds of different things, whether it's sexuality or just nuances in philosophy or theology, all those types of little things, or even living, marital status, you name it.
Yeah.
And when I encounter those things, I always have said that, I say always, I mean, I've come to believe that this is where new things begin to crop up, because people, all these outcasts or all these folks that are not really fully accepted, something else will crop up, a medicine of some sort crops up to serve them,
Right.
And it's nuanced and it's for them. And then that's where I think we see these branches just bloom off, because people just don't want to be left out. They really don't. I mean, nobody wants to be shunned for something who they are.
And people are looking for connection in some fashion. Yeah.
I mean, I think togetherness is important, and I do think community can be important too. I don't think taking things that the way that people are born or whatever their life has made them, I don't think it's healthy to leave them out. I just never have. I've just felt like, it just doesn't make any sense to me we're not creating community if we're doing that.
Right. I agree with you completely. I feel like it's important to be open to anybody who walks through the door. How to create, though, an environment where they feel comfortable is a little trickier.
I bet as a teacher, that's probably an interesting dynamic too. I mean, you probably have people from all walks of life come to Kung Fu. And so that's interesting, because you probably do get to create a space to some degree, because it's outside of some of those little markers that people get judged for.
Yeah. But I still wish it was better. You know what I mean? Like, we have a pretty diverse group of people that come through, but I wish it was better. And sometimes, again, more questions. What might be missing if someone isn't comfortable walking through the door?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not so obvious. Sometimes it's not so obvious. And I think that a lot of the work people are attempting to do in this country right now, discussions around that we're trying to find our way to have these discussions. And one can argue that we're not doing a very good job of it. But we have to go through this process to figure out how we don't shun people.
Yeah.
Like if you're upholding a tradition, like you touched on that too. In some ways, if you're organized and offer community, you're upholding some kind of tradition. But how could upholding that tradition make other people feel shunned?
Yes. God, that is so
what do
difficult.
You let go within a tradition? And what is preservation of a tradition? What is that? What is that? What are we preserving? What is that tradition?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have all the answers for that. I think we do a pretty good job at the school, though, of making people feel welcome, though.
Yeah. I mean, that's it right there, the intent.
To my background, again, I'm a white working class person, and I personally don't feel I attract enough people who have a working class background, and I don't care what color they are.
You said you don't feel like you attract enough of a working...
I don't feel like we attract enough.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's like my nonprofit Warriors Path. That's one thing I'm trying to figure out and do outreach and resolve. And for people I have, if I attract some people that are professional people, are very successful people, and just people that we would consider middle class people, even from all walks of life, that's great. And I love my students, and I'm just so grateful for them and the support that I get. But it also enriches their practice if I could attract a more diverse group.
Yeah.
Whatever that means, So I mean economically, socially, educationally, whatever that means. I want to get as many different people in there as I can so that our training environment in the school is a mirror for real life out in the real world.
Makes perfect sense.
And the more we create that, the more fruitful. See, this goes back to substance, right? The more that we could create that in the school, the training environment, the more fruitful the environment is for people who come to train. They feel the substance of it because it mirrors real life.
I like that. I mean, it's true. I mean, I get this feeling, especially with like old entities sometimes, or whether they be religious or clubs or groups, or even just even businesses that have an old board of directors or something like that. I mean, you see this sort of homogenization of things where it's like, where you said, it just becomes a tradition and the wheel just kind of spins around from generation to generation. And the more it spins, the more everything just kind of bleeds into this one sort of gray wall, that doesn't want to change. And that's difficult. I mean, without someone consciously saying, hey, we need to stimulate. It's like those forest burns that stimulate the forest for new growth. I mean, something's got to come along and strike the ground with lightning every once in a while, to germinate those things. And you have to have somebody who's willing to do that, I think, and that's not always without conflict.
Well, and you and I were raised Catholic. You were raised Catholic, too?
Well, I have Catholic families, but I went through the process of converting. That was what I was talking about, where I had to back out because there were just things that it was one of those situations. So I was in it and got out.
Well, in my community, the church was the centerpiece for us. It was where community happened. And in our present day, organized religion isn't meeting the needs of our society the way it used to. Now, why it's not? I mean, obviously there's some obvious reasons it's not, with scandals and of every color, shape, and form.
Right.
And not only Christian, I'm saying across the board.
Right.
So we know that's a problem. But looking beyond that as well, what's missing in our American society? Why? And I know people are looking for community, but they're not finding it. I see the opioid crisis as part of that sign that people are looking for something else, but they're not finding it, and they're turning to drugs.
Yeah, we see that here too. I mean, it's, meth is kind of a problem in our community, and I mean, it's not something anybody really likes to talk about, but it's the truth. I mean, it's actually sad when it becomes a joke, like, oh, well, if you want this, go to this city because that's where you get meth. It's like, don't make the mistake that we have the good drugs here. It's meth cooking in this community, and that's it's a terrible thing, and it's like, somebody's preying on somebody, and that's just really sad. I mean, but if there wasn't a need, there wouldn't be a seller.
Right.
I get it. I mean, it's, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think about that all the time because I long for community too, and to some degree, this podcast serves in that regard, and some of the companions that I've made through it, and those relationships seem to be pretty durable, but there's something about proximity that's important too. And that's something that I desperately wish that I had in this community was proximity. But I have this sort of no one left behind attitude, I guess, when it comes to these things. And it's like when I just can't settle for it, and I won't settle for it, I guess, when I get inside of an organization or group and then I start to run into the bylaws where it's like, well, we don't accept this. Nobody says it, but we don't tolerate this type of person or that person. Then I'm just out because I don't have the energy. These organizations are so old sometimes and so structured. And the idea of changing it from the inside out sounds good, but it's an uphill battle, and you're always going to be in an uphill situation. To me, it'd be better to just, somebody said a windblown seed. I'm like, I'd rather just be a windblown seed and figure it out here, whatever out here is, And that's sad because that's not community, No, I mean,
it's not. It's not. And for those of us who practice Asian disciplines, it's relatively new in the United States for people to practice intently Asian disciplines. And they all came from different Asian countries. So there's a lot of cultural structure that worked in Japan and worked in China and worked in Korea that is still around a lot of these disciplines that got transplanted to America. Does it work for Americans?
Right.
So that's the challenge for especially Buddhism in the United States. You don't want to let go of things that are important to the practice, but at the same time, are some of these things creating a barrier for American people when it comes to practice?
I can see that. I read a book recently that touched on the same thing. And I mean, he talked about that, that coming to the West as a teacher, he talked about how a lot of teachers aren't prepared for the West from the East because it is such a different animal than what culturally. There's so much consumption and ego-driven activities and messages, and that's like, it's a hurdle, and it even will affect the teachers, is what he was saying, is that as a teacher, he just wasn't ready. And he even went through an addiction, and, he fell into the same poisons that affect everybody else in the country. And he said, gosh, I just was not prepared for this. Mm-hmm. I was like, man, that's a hard reality. When I read that, I was like, man, that's actually difficult to read. You want to believe that the practices are universal enough to where they could come to any country and really deal with it. But in some ways, America's got some unique problems.
But it also goes to the importance of community, a religious community, because one person by themselves is going to find it to be a big challenge because we are influenced by the people around us. See, that's like another thing we have to accept as humans. Birds of a feather flock together. And you can only exist for so long, man. Yeah. Sooner or later, our parents told us that. Don't hang around with those kids because sooner or later,
it's true.
Like that. Sooner or later, you are going to be like that.
Oh, I mean, it is true. And we've heard it our whole lives that it actually is true, right? It is interesting. Religion is so powerful, and spiritual teachings are so powerful. The structure, the influence of an organized group, whether it's a Catholic parish or just a pop-up ministry of some sort, I have seen it happen firsthand, like someone, and I hate to use the word drink the Kool-Aid, but like how quickly that can occur and unquestioned. And I'm like, wow. And I know the word cult probably isn't too friendly to religion, but sometimes even these, authenticated religions smack of like cult-like behavior. I'm like, it's so interesting how quickly someone can completely be consumed by it and change their thinking radically just to be accepted within the community. And I think that's a desperation to be a part of a community, to be accepted in a tribe. I see it over and again where it's like, oh, if I do all these things, I'm accepted here. So if I just change my thinking and retool it just a little bit and just follow all of this, then this set in stone entity accepts me and then I can look back on everybody that's outside the barrier and go, well,
right.
If you want in, you got to change to be in, if you want the community. It's just a strange thing, but I think it's sometimes I do think it's out of desperation for acceptance and community.
I do too. And, I think that's just another expression of being human, right? I don't understand it well. Because I'm probably too much of an egomaniac, but I never fell prey to that very easily. I'm always fighting authority and fighting this and
right.
fighting that. You know what I mean? I'm one of those people.
Me too.
But I feel compassion on all of our need to connect. And I agree with you. I think that part of that susceptibility is people who really want to connect, for some reason haven't been able to up to that point, and possibly I would think in a cult, you kind of know what your life's going to be like from day to day. So that there's also a stability there that you don't have to deal with the unknown.
Yeah. Yeah, because
it's attractive to people. Okay, I know what's expected of me. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't know because I don't know anybody either who has been susceptible to that. You're going to eventually probably come across somebody in your interviewing, that had an experience and is talking about it.
I mean, even like retreats, I can say this just because it wasn't too many years ago. I mean, I've been out of those retreats enough time now to look back on them. And one in particular that I went on, it was and I mean, I know some of these people, I don't think they'll listen to it, but I mean, it's just the truth. I mean, it was just my observation in hindsight. There was cult-like behavior. I mean, it isolates you, deprives you of sleep. It's very structured. You're given a handbook. I mean, and I watched even like post-retreat, they break out into small groups to check in with you, and everybody has to bring their handbook, and the handbook, there's just stuff in there when I would go, yeah, I don't know. This is questionable.
Right.
And there would be a slice that would not question it. It was just like that handbook was the new way they were going to live.
Right.
And they had accountability partners and things like that, and I thought, yeah, it's not like they're isolating you necessarily out in the world. But I even remember a post-retreat meeting where somebody called me and said, we need to make sure your wife is there. And I was like, well, why? And I was like, this is weird. Why is my wife? She didn't go on the retreat. And he goes, well, just so she understands how things are going to be from now on. And I was like, yeah, we're not going to do
a bunch of red flags right
I'm
there.
like, this has moved beyond spiritual retreat to even on retreat, though. I mean, I had told my wife post-retreat, I said, they take your cell phone, they don't want these cell phones. They don't want to, they keep some of your belongings, but they say it's to keep, so you can focus on the retreat. Yeah. But in hindsight, it starts to look a little strange. And I did tell her, I said, yeah, there was one night on that retreat where I was like, I'm about to walk out of this place and walk as many miles as it takes to get to a payphone and tell my wife to just come get me and I'll figure it out, because this is not healthy.
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary.
Yeah. So, I mean, to some degree, I get it. But at the same time, what I don't get is, well, no, I do understand from that experience it was community. It was all about brotherhood and community. And some people were so desperate for that. for that brotherhood feeling of acceptance within that small tribe, that they were willing to roll with it,
And that's going to extremes again, right? Like, how do we find that balance? This is the yin and yang of it again. Like, how do we find the balance of being connected with other people, with our environment, but yet still having an individual position?
Yeah.
In Zen practice, we'll call it our Dharma position. And like the yin yang symbol, going between those two things, the degree in which you do is constantly changing, but there should be a symbiosis between both. It shouldn't be just one way or the other. Tricky business.
Tricky business. Gosh, it is tricky business.
And I'm happy, I know it.
Hey there, Good News listener. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I've enjoyed producing it. Now, it's time for the Fishing for Goodies segment, where I turn my interviewer role over to the Good News Fishbowl. Longtime listeners know that the Fishbowl contains over 400 unique questions, many seeded by you, the listeners. Did you know that you could submit unique questions to the Fishbowl? That's right. Just call the Good News hotline at 802-459-1668 to have your question added. You can also visit findthegood.news and send me an email. Now, let's take that dive into the fishbowl. Well, this has been pretty dynamic. I've enjoyed every minute of this conversation.
I enjoyed talking to you too.
This is fun, man. What a great conversation. So, look, you did listen to some of the podcasts?
I have.
Okay, did you get to the end where we do the fishbowl?
Where we get in the fishbowl and we keep banging against the glass?
That's right. So this fishbowl's been around since almost the beginning of the show.
It's so colorful.
Yeah, it's covered in stickers and all kinds of stuff.
Stickers on it.
It's pretty groovy.
Oh, it's amazing.
So
it
I
looks
draw
kind of like a very psychedelic basketball.
Oh yeah, it does, doesn't it? It don't look like a fishbowl anymore. I mean, it used to when people would come in when we had in-person interviews, they would bring stickers and stuff and stick on here, so it's covered. But what I do is I draw 3 questions out. So the universe is going to ask the questions now out of the fishbowl.
Who knows? I might combust.
All right, so I've got 1, I've got 2, and I've got 3. Okay. I'm curious to know the answer to this one.
You went like, So look, Oran, you were looking down. I was going like this when you go,
So yeah, you're wondering what it is too, right? I bet some people have been afraid to put their hand in here like, oh my gosh, I don't know about this. I like this question though. What is your most treasured possession?
What is my most treasured possession?
That's an odd thing to ask of a Buddhist, right?
Yeah. That's a hard one, honestly.
Do you have items that have, like, I guess, nostalgia that you just go, yeah, that bring back memories that you keep?
All right. I'll give you this. And this informed my practice. My grandmother I'm named after my paternal grandmother.
Okay.
Pauline. So my maternal grandmother's name was Anne, but this has to do with Pauline. She was born in the States, but grew up until 12 years old in Poland. They went back to Poland. So she had a necklace that she bought there, which is Our Lady of Częstochowa, which is the Virgin Mary in a Polish version of it.
Okay.
When I was getting married the first time, she gave me this necklace, and she actually, she left Poland a little later, maybe 16. So she got this necklace when she was 14 years old, and she gave me this necklace, and she said, Paula, I'm giving you this necklace because it's a special day. You're getting married. I got this when I was 14. But she goes, but the clasp doesn't work very well. So I want you, don't wear it. This is like,
wow, okay.
Don't wear the necklace, but I want you to have this.
I see, okay.
It means a lot to me. So I'm like, okay, Grandma, I won't. So I put it in a drawer. I'm living my married life. We're having all kinds of bad luck. So I figured I'm going to wear this necklace because it's going to bring me some good luck. Mm-hmm. I wore the necklace. It did bring me some good luck. And at this time, I was still out partying and stuff. I went out partying with my friends. We went out dancing. I come home. The necklace is gone.
Oh, no.
I went back to the bar. They couldn't find it. I walked up and down the street. For years, I looked in pawn shops to see if I could find it. I mean, literally for years, it bothered me that I lost this necklace. Now, my grandma was still alive when I lost it, and I prayed to God she never asked me if I.
Yeah.
She didn't. And then she died, and she never knew. Now she knows, right? But she never knew I lost it. But I vowed never to get that attached to any physical thing again in my life.
That is an interesting story.
Because it brought me so much pain.
To lose it.
Right. And I'm like, I am never getting that attached to anything in my life ever again.
Man, I needed to hear that story. I'm serious. I really needed to hear that today because, I mean, I told you I was robbed, and some of the items that were, some of it was stuff that can be replaced, but some of the items had sentiment, man. Like, and that's the stuff that just pissed me off. I was just like, and I even remember sitting with the police officer, and he was, well, what was it? And he was writing it down, and I was just like, and he was just doing his job, and then part of me was getting angry, like, don't you that item there, like I wanted him to like highlight marker it and like stop and let me tell him why it mattered. And it's the same thing. It was just full of sentiment. And it's like, you're right. The pain of that, it was a memory. It was like somebody took a memory and just trashed it, man.
Yeah.
But I get it. I mean, it's hard because I'm attached to not junk, but I have like gosh, my whole office is full of this stuff. It's like, oh, this is a story attached to this item. And that, man, that's hard. It is. Yep. It's painful. So glad you shared that. So you never found it?
I never found it. But I do have to say, most of the stuff I have around me, honestly, Oran, are gifts from people that I've taught.
Oh, well, that's lovely.
My business partner, who's also one of the Black Sashes in our school, so she trained with me, became my business partner, and she's my good friend. She bought me for one of my birthdays or Christmas a replica of that necklace.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
And I have it on my altar, actually. I have it around, not the Buddha, but I have it around one of the female images.
I love that.
On my altar, yeah.
So, there you go right there. I mean, it kind of gets back to what you said earlier about forming a mental construct in your mind, makes it living. Now... your friend gives you that necklace, and it's not the original one, but the memory's still there, and the sentiment is still there. Even if you lost that, now it's like it's timeless. It's in your...
And she made an effort to find something that would be old and older. It's not as old as my grandma's, and similar. And so it wasn't like, and you can't just go to a store and buy it. You know what I mean? It was Polish, Our Lady of Czestochowa. It's an antique. It's all this stuff. So I'm honestly, I'm a very blessed person.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that story. I really do. I'm so glad that you shared it, actually. It was an odd question, too. I didn't know what you were going to say. So interesting. Okay, well, let's see what happens with this next one.
Drum roll, please.
I mean, this is such an odd pull. I mean, I'm curious. It's such a short question. Are you a pacifist?
No.
No. Is it any more complicated than that?
I'm not. You could tell by my answer. There was no hesitation.
Not even. No, I'm not a pacifist.
No, I'm not. I'm not. But I don't. I have to say a few things to that.
Yeah, please. I'm curious.
I study the human condition and I study humanity. So because I study humanity, I understand that there's violence in the world. And I don't know if I believe there ever will not be violence in the world, because it may be a training tool for us as human beings. Second, I want to hold in my heart the people who fight for us. And I want to make sure the door is always open for people who have found themselves in situations where they had to fight.
Yeah.
And I don't want spiritual practice to ever be denied to them. So if I say I'm a pacifist, I'm afraid they're going to feel shunned.
I understand.
Okay, because I'm a martial artist, so anyone who is not a pacifist. And then thirdly, I want to thank our politicians, and I know this won't be a good thing to do, and our judges, and the people who take responsibility for violence in our societies, we put this on them to make the decisions to go to war or not go to war, or put people in jail or put people to death, and then we condemn them for it. And I don't think that's fair to them.
That's interesting.
So I want to be accepting of the people who make the hard decisions.
Yeah. I mean, it's so easy to be armchair about everything, when you're not really facing it. They should have done this, or they should have decided.
That is really bad for spiritual development for all of us.
Say that again?
There's a moral superiority to it that is damaging for any individual's spiritual development.
That gets me thinking about lately. I've been thinking a lot about Anthony Bourdain again for some reason. I used to love to watch his travel videos, and I knew there was a lot more going on with him than there was more than just meets the eye, Mm-hmm. And I read an article about him the other day, and it was talking about his tattoos, and he had gotten, going into what they meant. They each one kind of meant something to him. Yeah. And there was one on his arm that was a coin. And I think the way it was a Greek word, I think it was epoche or something like that. Epoch, I can't remember how you say it. But it was a printed article, so I couldn't hear it. But he had pulled it from a book he was reading, and it was The Philosophy of I Withhold Judgment. And it was really beautiful what he had to say about it. And what really got into some mysterious territory where he was like, really, it's a space where it makes room for everybody, where he's like, look, I may not have done what you've done, so I have to withhold my judgment, and it kind of reminds me of what you just said. We put people in positions where it's very easy to judge them and say we wouldn't do the same, but we haven't been in those same difficult situations. We just don't really know what we do. Exactly. We don't know until we've been in the right situation. And I really feel that all of us could be put in the right situation. Yeah. That we be violent. Yeah. Well, my dad always told me, I didn't go to war, so you would have to go to war. And I took that very seriously, unfortunately, he suffered through war, and it enhanced his violent nature, his angry nature. And for a long time as a young person, I resented him for that. I resented him for being so angry and mean sometimes the way he was, or the way he would, that the war kind of informed the way he treated the world when he came back.
Sure.
And as a young person, I was very spiteful of that, but then as I've gotten older, I more look at him as like a sacrificial lamb now because of what he told me. I go, well, I don't have to be that way because he was that way. And that's a luxury in a lot of ways, that I have here in my comfy chair.
Right.
That's a good answer. That was a very good question. So small and simple, but so much in it. So this is the last one, and I'm curious about this one too. It says, what are you self-taught?
What am I self-taught?
Yeah.
Any intellectual side that I have, all of that was self-taught.
Yeah?
Yeah, pretty much. And I believe in the American ideal that we have a lot of knowledge available to us. Not everybody could have a path toward a college education, and so on and so forth. And all the academic side of me, that's been primarily self-taught.
I love that you brought that up, and you said that earlier in our conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's important too, because right now there's a lot of people graduating high school. It's that time of year, Yes. And my son's having those conversations with me. He's graduating, and he's like, I just don't know right now if college is the right path for me. Mm-hmm. And not in some way where he just wants to have a good time, but he's like really going, I'm looking at the future, and I want to make good first steps, and I don't know that that's the right step for me. And you point out that that's not always even an option for some people, for a lot of people. And you can still learn and be educated and self-taught in a lot of ways that are useful and helpful and enriching without having to take that course, that path. So
I want to say, if there's any young people listening and they wanted to follow that path and the doors have been closed for them and they're heartbroken about it, don't give up. Avail yourself of all the information. Make sure you meet people that are educated. Have relationships with them. Keep your eyes open. There's mentors and people who are willing to teach you everywhere. Don't think it means you're not going to be successful.
That is
Just
a good message.
Take responsibility for your own education and keep learning.
I think you just keyed in on something that I tell him and I tell other people, and I wish someone had told me. I really do.
Right.
And that is, for one, I needed to travel more when I was younger. I should have exposed myself to more people and more cultures and more places. I really should have. And I think just in doing that, that would have, like as you said, exposed me to different ideas earlier, mentors, as you stated. I just think it changes the course of your life. It puts more options in front of you, and a lot of those options have to do with people.
Right. And I'll say like that, you bring up a good point, and this happens to all of us. When we want help with something, we tend to focus on only certain individuals that we want to help us. So we're like, this guy needs to help me with this woman needs to help me with this, that person. And if they don't help you, you get angry and discouraged.
Right.
If you could keep an open mind and allow the universe to bring people into your life, and you can engage with people without judgment, you're going to find the universe is going to give you the help you need. It might not be from the people you expect it from, but be open. It is always going to bring you the person you need to help you with the specific thing that you need help with, if you keep an open mind.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's the way. I love that. I wish that I'd learned that, earlier.
Me too, my friend.
I really do.
Me too.
But I get what you get. And as you said earlier too, sometimes those things we go through, they do shape us. So maybe we can be that for somebody else too. That's always great too, to be of service. And in a way, I know for sure you're doing that. I mean, you're touching young people of all ages.
Yeah.
in as a teacher.
I love my children that I teach. I love them.
I thought that was so cool. See, we don't have anything like that in our community. We don't have Kung Fu. It's mostly like Taekwondo, I think, studios around here. I mean, there's some other things too. I think like Jiu-Jitsu maybe, but Kung Fu has got this sort of allure to it, that kind of a thing that it's a curiosity. In my community, it would be anyway. And I thought, man, that would have been an interesting thing to intersect with at a young age,
Well, I'm hoping, like with Warriors Path Buddhist Academy, I'm hoping that we'll train more people who could teach. And so more people will go out and be able to open, places wherever they want. Yeah. And really, really understand the art and be able to offer that to other communities.
So I got one more question. It's just one that I ask at the end of every show. Did anything good happen today?
Yes, I made a new friend.
Yes, I like hearing that. I love that you said that. I don't always say that, but the truth of the matter is I've become good friends with most of the people that have been on this podcast, and what an enrichment that has been. I mean, really, it's not an empty platitude. So when you say that, that makes me feel really good, because I always enjoy these conversations, but I never am sure if that's just me,
Oh no, I enjoyed it immensely. And honestly, I really respect what you're trying to do, that you're bringing both people who write books and all that kind of stuff, but also just average people to come in and talk about their story, because we're all spiritual seekers. If we could break away our mindset of what a spiritual seeker is and kind of tear that down, everybody's a spiritual seeker. Yeah. Everybody's looking to answer the big questions in our lives.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I get that totally. That's exactly how I feel. I mean, it's some basic universal type questions that, for me, that was kind of what happened. I mean, when I was younger, I went through a moment where I was just confused and I needed to know, I was like, why am I even here? Like, what is the purpose of this existence? And I know that's a big question and I still don't have the answer, and that's okay. But it was just that first crack, in that midst of that despair. And it was the beginning, and it was enough, I think. Yeah.
For sure.
So if you want people to find out more about your work and what you're doing, what are some URLs or the best way that you want people to interact with you?
They could go to our school website, healthkickkungfu.com.
Okay.
You go to warriorspathacademy.com. They could find us on Facebook, Healthkick Kung Fu and Warriors Path. And if all of that is too much, if you just type my name in, Paula Lazarz Kung Fu Chicago, I'll come up and you can find me.
Yeah, you have a unique name. You're like me. Your last name is unique. And I was like, okay, when I started doing my little cyber research, I was like, oh, she's easy to find. She's like me. Oran is not a common name, so there's only so many of them. I found a lot of good information. I didn't bring this up either, but did you write a book? I saw a book.
I wrote a book with one of my Kung Fu masters about practical Kung Fu self-defense.
Okay.
So it's out there. I don't know if it's in print anymore, but I will say I have a book in me.
Yeah.
I have a few things I still want to do. Right now I'm working on my Shaolin stage show.
Oh, wow. That's cool. That's really cool.
I have a book. I tried to sit down and start, but it's not time yet to write it.
That's so
I'm still
interesting.
I'm still in process of learning what I need to write.
Man, I totally get that. I've kind of had you vocalize that so well, because I felt the same way. Like, there's a book in there, but every time I think about, like, try to put a structure down, I'm like, yeah, this just ain't, something hasn't happened yet. I don't know what it is.
Exactly.
But something hasn't happened yet that's like the linchpin to this whole thing. And I mean, even just talking to you today, I'm just like, yeah, she's got a story here that would be a great book. I know it's there. Now, there's probably so much more we could have got into. So yeah, you definitely got a book in you. I can tell.
Yeah. Well, every now and then you write down the stories of your life, right? So I have started doing that just for fun, because I have so many cool stories, honestly, just anecdotes that are hilarious. Some of them are hilarious. So in good Zen tradition, the working title of that is Somebody Who's Nobody.
Somebody Who's Nobody. I like that. I like that. That gets in who am I, right? Yeah.
But that's just anecdotal. It has, I don't know. Of course, Zen is in there, but we'll see what happens with that. That's probably just a hobby for as I get older. I could, write a paragraph here and there.
Yeah. I don't even know how people have time to write a book. I think about that too. I'm like, what's I supposed to write a book, man? Like the time it would take to sit down and bang.
Well, it depends, right? It depends on the path of people. But what I do is very interactive. So, I would have to block off the time to do it. And I know people do that in order to write the book. And I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah.
And that's their path. But right now I'm in the thick of it, rubbing elbows with people, COVID notwithstanding.
Oh, yeah. Boy, that changes us all, right? That's true. Yeah. I get that. Yeah, I do a lot of creative writing for my clients. And I usually find by the time I'm through doing that, by the end of the day, I'm kind of smoked out on writing. I need a break, a mental break, because some of it is just romance copy. I mean,
sure.
Trying to make a product sound wonderful and great. And, when you're diving into that all day, sometimes it's just like, I don't think I have an ounce of writing left.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, yeah, I get that, though. It makes sense. I mean, to set time aside, to figure that out. Maybe one of these days. I want to read your book. When you write that book, I want to read that book.
I'm more thankful every moment that I found.
Thanks for listening to my Beacon Series conversation with Christy Hugsat. If you'd like to experience her book, Be You Only Better, visit findthegood.news/bookshop. If you found something of use in this conversation, please share this episode with a friend, leave a review, or consider visiting findthegood.news/donate, where you can help me continue this good news mission from the Louisiana Gulf Coast. I thank you for pressing play and for syncing up with this good news beacon.